welcome everybody. Let's talk real estate, your weekly BS with Barry Saywitz about the current commercial real estate market here in Southern California. As we take a no BS look at both sides of the issues driving this market today to find the best solutions going forward. With our man right in the middle, it's Barry Saywitz. Hey, Barry.
Morning, Paul. Welcome back to Let's Talk Real Estate. It's Tuesday, and if it's Tuesday, we're talking real estate. Thanks again to all of our viewers and our listeners for tuning in. I'm excited about today's show. I am Barry Saywitz, president of the Saywitz Company and managing partner of Saywitz Properties. And if it's one thing I've learned in my 30 plus years of doing this, it's to try and gather the best information that you can to make informed decisions about an ever-changing real estate market. And today is no different. We're going to try and educate you folks out there on a little bit more of the housing market. I'm excited about today's show. It's part two of our look at the residential real estate market. And while most of the time we're talking commercial, the fact that interest rates are rising, the housing market is changing, we really thought it was appropriate to dive a little deeper into the housing market. And so today, I'm pleased to welcome our two esteemed guests. I have Sarah Knauer and Victoria Velasquez, both from the agency real estate brokerage office in West Los Angeles. You guys, welcome to the show. You're based out of Brentwood and the office there, and glad to have you make the trek down to crummy Orange County for the morning.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. We're so excited.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we talked last week about the Orange County real estate housing market. Los Angeles, not that far away, not that different. But I want to delve into it a little bit. But before we go there, I want to take a step backwards and look at where we were before we look at where we are and where we're going. And so if we rewind a little bit before COVID, the market was chugging along, prices going up. People could do no wrong. Everybody who bought a house was a real estate expert and made money. And everybody who listed a house, it was an easier gig to do. And then all of a sudden COVID hits. What happened during COVID that changed, I guess, in terms of the dynamics of the market from your perspective? And Sarah, maybe.
Yeah, I can start. So COVID really propelled things, I would say. The very low interest rates, I think, sparked a lot of people to look at homes and want to buy that maybe hadn't considered it before. And the way people live just changed. All of a sudden, everyone wanted a yard. They wanted office space at home. They wanted a neighborhood that they could walk in. They wanted distance from their neighbors. And we just saw so much activity and so much demand. And at the same time, we had really low inventory consistently going throughout the last couple of years. So it was, prices appreciating a lot, multiple offers happening on almost every home that people wanted to buy. And it just felt like the floodgates had opened. At the same time, we saw a lot of people getting frustrated without being able to get a home for quite some time, right? Writing offer after offer after offer. And it took a while for people to maybe find their dream home. But it was just really busy.
Yeah, I think one thing too, LA was uniquely positioned because of the big urban cities in the US, right? The San Francisco, New York, LA. You definitely had people during COVID that moved to more suburban areas, change of lifestyle, all of that. And I think that was talked a lot about in the press. But I think what people didn't talk about was that if you were in one of those cities and you kind of had to be in one of those cities because you were in an industry that required you to be there, or you were just in that kind of job that you can't move to Montana, right? LA was the best positioned of the three cities for COVID, right? We have really great weather, you get bigger lots, you actually have land and yard and outside areas. So I relocated 9 families from New York to LA during that time. I think people talked a lot about people leaving the big cities, but there was also a shift. And I think LA got a lot of those very urban families who needed to stay in that type of city, but wanted something different.
Yeah, and I think too, in Los Angeles here, in Southern California in general, people are used to being outside, so they can do more things with it. I know a lot of people from LA came to Orange County because it was even more lax, and so people wanted to get out, get to the beach and what have you. But the run up in the market as a result of that, were you seeing multiple offers and above asking bidding all the way across the board, all the way from the lower to the moderate to the higher income homes? I mean, really just lack of inventory and a lot of demand, I think.
Yeah, all price points.
Yeah, it was insane. I think we were talking about it in the car on the way down here, and it's like the things were appreciating so quickly that agents were trying to price properties at market. But by the time a property hit the market, another deal had closed, set a new comp, and you would get multiple offers. So that property would close and set the new high comp. Like it was truly crazy. I mean, 10, 20, 30 offers on properties.
Yeah, and so you have all this run up. Plus, at the same time, you have all these folks that are refinancing who don't want to move. They either pull money out of their house and remodel and use that money, so it didn't really cost them anything, and they lock in at a low interest rate, and then they don't move, and then they make their house nicer. And at the same time, you don't have a problem having your home appraised because you have all these other high comps going on at the same time. And so you had that dynamic, I think, as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so then we get towards, I don't want to say COVID's over because it's not, but certainly you have the commercial side of things, really a lot of stuff shut down. You have eviction moratorium. You have businesses that are going under. You have restaurants really struggling to stay alive, movie studios struggling to figure it out and what they're supposed to do or not do. And at the same time, people are still working from home and doing their thing. And so now you start to pull out of COVID. And now we have this run up of the interest rates. And so what has that done in the short term? Because it's only been a few months now, right? It's still going on, and it's going to happen again, I think. What has that done to the activity? So if you had 10, 20, 30 offers, where does it stand in today's real world in terms of the number of offers and the activity?
We're seeing less offers on homes now, for sure. We're not seeing the 10, 20s so much anymore. Our market is less interest rate sensitive because we are dealing mostly with those medium to high price points where people do have very large down payments, or there's several all cash offers, again, at every price point. So while we've seen it affect us a little bit, it hasn't really affected pricing, maybe affected a little bit of demand or a little bit of that sense of urgency where people aren't feeling like, oh, let me take advantage of this 2.5% interest rate. I can wait until we find something that's right, or we really need to move. And so that's how we're seeing it in our market.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, it's interesting. Right when COVID happened, there was this shock factor. Residential real estate is very human behavior sensitive, right? As opposed to, I think, commercial, it's a little bit more
less emotional.
Yes, we're a very emotional business. So right when COVID happened, there was this shock and everything just stopped. Obviously, it was this major thing the world was dealing with. I think we saw a little bit of that too, because the interest rates increased pretty rapidly in a short period of time. And I think everyone was like, oh my gosh, what's happening? And then there's a larger financial and economic implication to that. So we track, another thing we look at is the number of canceled escrows, right? So that number dramatically rose when interest rates first went up really high. And because people are just like, what's going to happen,
they're in a panic.
Right? So they're in a panic. So that was a big thing that sort of happened. And now we see that settling a little bit more. Like this is kind of becoming our new normal. We, hopefully things don't get super worse, but like people are sort of like, okay, we're no longer in where we were before. Now we're in a different scenario and we need to kind of adapt. And so things have definitely picked up a little bit, but we're in definitely a very different market than we were.
Yeah, and I think the canceled escrows to me is a function of what I'll call the retrade, which is the buyer gets remorse. The buyer says, hey, things are changing. The buyer says, hey, the world's a little bit worse. I should get something for it. Or I'm just not going to do it because I'm just going to pull back. And then the seller still goes, no, wait a minute, I'm still in yesterday's world. I don't want to give it. And then you have a disconnect. And whether that's commercial or residential, you have to have both sides on an even keel. So when the buyer believes that he has to overbid to get rid of all the other guys out there who might do something stupid, then he does it. If he feels like there's nobody else out there and he's the only game in town, then he goes back and tries to dig a little bit, and then you have this disconnect.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so now you have interest rates that are, I'm going to call it double what it was earlier in the year. And then they're talking in a couple of weeks about raising it another 75 basis points. And then again, so rates could be theoretically 2.5 to 3 times by the end of the year what they were before. And to me, what that does is it has to affect the value of the home at the end of the day. On commercial, it's a direct result of the income. And so if the income of the property didn't change and the return gets worse because of the interest rates, the value has to come down. Residential, you're back to the same concept, I think, which is it's emotional. I love that house. I don't care. I want it. And in many instances, you have older houses that are going to get gutted or remodeled anyway, so they don't really care about the condition of it. But do you see that the expectation on the buyer side is different, and that going forward, I feel like I don't really have to compete with all these other guys? I'm going to make my decisions based on my own time frame and my own desires.
Yeah, so people are definitely waiting. They're not writing an offer within 3 or 4 days. Maybe things are staying on the market a couple more weeks. They're waiting to see, well, are they going to get a bunch of offers, or can I wait 2 weeks and then maybe be the only one to write an offer? We're still seeing, appreciation in their pricing, maybe by a lower rate for sure. And I think the interest rate more affects somebody's purchasing power, right? If they could have previously afford a $4 million house, maybe they can only spend 3.7 now. And so their buyers are having to more adjust, I think, their expectations for what they can buy versus waiting for, they're not necessarily, I think, thinking that $4 million house is going to come down in price. Maybe they'll be hopeful that it will, but it's a little bit of adjusting expectations.
Well, you also find that when the buyer goes to put in the offer, if it was a $4 million house, if we're using that example, I'm going to offer 3.7. I'm not offering 4.1 anymore. That's not how the world works anymore.
Yeah, I think it's still transition. People are kind of like, I actually have a $4 million house that I just listed, right? And we've had people come in and be like, is this going to go crazy over? Like, they're still kind of feeling it out. And no, the reality is it's not. We're not expecting crazy multiples. But I think people are still trying to feel out where the market is. There are properties, a good property priced well is still going to do very well. I mean, we just had in one of our neighborhoods a property that had 17 offers, but that's definitely more of an outlier than the common thing we're seeing across the board.
Yeah, well, also it would seem that if the seller's still trying to hold on to yesterday's number, then that also helps fuel less offers because I'm still holding on to the higher price or the higher end of the spectrum.
Yeah, and that's a big component. I think when you look at residential, there's a human component of pricing, right? So you have a seller who's working with an agent to determine a price. They may overprice it and the property has to get reduced and sell under. That doesn't mean the property was actually worth less. It just means it was never worth what it was priced at.
Yes.
And I think that's a big thing. People start seeing reductions and it's like, is the market may not be depreciating. It's just that people are overpricing their properties.
But it to me, it is potentially a self-fulfilling prophecy in that you have the seller who has this false expectation and you have their agent who says, sure, whatever, we can try it. And we put it on the market. And if it doesn't sell, it's not the agent's fault. I can blame interest rates. I can blame the market. It's easy. I don't stink at my job. I have other factors going on that are affecting it. And we'll just come back and drop the price. Then the buyer who's waiting says, oh, market's soft. They just dropped the price. Except that maybe you never even got back to what it really should have been in the first place. The other side of it is if it sits on the market for 30 days, people, oh my gosh, it didn't sell, right? Well, hey, it's not supposed to sell in 3 or 4 days. That's not normal, right? That is abnormal. 30 to 60 days might be more normal. And then it's not that big of a deal, but people start to panic. Are you starting to see that? Hey, this thing didn't sell,
yeah.
Right?
100%. I wish you could talk to our clients because that's literally what we try to tell them and they don't believe us. But pricing is so important because, again, the human behavior component, people start to read into things. They think there's something wrong with the property and there's not.
Right. And look, I own a brokerage company. And so we deal with this on the commercial side all the time. We don't have the emotion, and no offense to the ladies out there, we don't have the wife chiming in going, no, honey, I want it. Right. But at the same time, it is a disconnect between expectation and potential reality. And then all it takes is then somebody to get boxed out, and then maybe they listen to you the next time. The problem with that is they didn't get what they want. And then as the agent, you have to do more work and start all over again. And so it's very hard to tell somebody potentially what they don't want to hear, or be the bearer of, I don't want to say bad news, but just reality that might be different from yesterday.
Sometimes
so it's a tough one.
The best thing when a buyer loses out on a property, because then the next time
Then they get real.
they do what they have to do to get
Right.
it.
You're like, hey, I told you so. You should listen to me next time, right?
Yeah.
But the flip side on the listing side of it is, and we have a client of ours on the commercial side who was crying to me that he listed his investment property and he had 3 offers and they were all below where he listed it. He listed it higher than the agent told him, just like we're talking about. And then he didn't do the deals. And then all of a sudden the rates ran up and now the offers are well below what they were at before. And he's like, I should have taken this deal. I'm like, well, yeah, I don't know. Who didn't you listen to? So
I know I have a $9 million property listed, and we had a very good, great terms offer, a very little bit under asking within a week of coming on the market. And they sent a too strong of a counter and we lost that buyer. And one other one within the first couple of weeks that they would have taken all day long now.
And the issue, I mean, for the folks out there who are in other parts of the country other than the west side of Los Angeles or other very expensive areas, the average home price we were talking about is night and day from what we talk about in West LA, Beverly Hills, Brentwood, Santa Monica, because those prices are at the top end of everything. And you have an entertainment component, which, no offense to the entertainers out there, but it is somewhat funny money. And I just pay cash, or I just got a big deal and I just got a bonus and what have you. No different to me than the tech boom in San Francisco, where you had very young families getting stock options for no reason, and all of a sudden I am an instant multimillionaire, and then I'll just go overbid for a home because I don't really care, because I didn't really earn that money, right? And now you have the same issue in the Bay Area, where you don't have 20 offers, you don't have people overbidding by 30%, you have people underbidding by 5%, and then that's kind of a normal gig. And so, but in West LA in particular, you have homes that get priced not so much on a per square foot basis. The metric is just looking at somebody else's comp maybe, or what you think it's worth, and then you get in these bigger numbers. Do you find now that it's softening, that 9 becomes 8, or does 9 become 8.9?
I
Something in
think
between,
in the
probably.
15 mil and over, it's definitely softening, because although you don't have clients that are interest rate sensitive, I think they're hyper sophisticated typically, right, in that price range, and they see an opportunity right now. You know, they're like, look, we know things are shifting. I'm liquid, I have the money, but I also want to be smart, and I feel like I can take advantage. I think there's a big opportunistic factor in that price demographic. You can speak more to like the, 8 to 15, because you have a listing there right now.
And so I don't think it's coming down 1 million, but maybe a couple 100,000. I think there'll be a little bit of a shift there, not a huge amount. And just, taking a little bit longer maybe to sell, going back to, like you said, the 30, 60 days on the market. And I think also a lot of times in these higher price points, we don't have people that have any sense of urgency to buy necessarily. They already live in a very lovely home. Maybe they just want this dream home that they've been looking for. And so they're going to be more cautious with just what's happening economically in the world and what they think is going to happen with values long term, potentially, more so than what's my monthly payment going to change when I pay cash and then take my money out after the fact. That's a little bit more of something that they're looking at.
I also find, I'm curious what your input is, when you get in the higher priced homes, the majority of the buyers are either paying cash or coming up with a large sum of money. And so the surety of close for the seller in a volatile market, to me, is important, because somebody who we're buying a property and we just made a deal on it, and it's 10-day close and it's all cash. And I don't think there's a lot of people standing out that they're going to go, hey, we're just going to write a check and I'm done and I don't really care. Somebody who's going to remodel says, I don't care what it looks like. I'm not going to send an inspector through there and write down every mark on the wall and every knob that's busted. Here's my number, and then that's the deal. And so I think when you get in the higher price homes, it becomes less of that, versus when you have a lower priced home, people look for things to be able to come back and nickel and dime, and you have that whole second retrade of the price and the deal.
Yeah. I mean, we still see a little, people will still do inspections. I think it depends, right? On like a new construction home, or like you said, a home that's like a major fixer, not as much. And surety of close is major for sure. People want to see cash. During COVID, we were writing no appraisal. The offers, the competitiveness was crazy. I think we're seeing a little bit of that come back, in contingencies and all that. But yeah, surety of close is always very, very important.
Yeah, I think somebody who needs a loan that's subject to the appraisal, it's a whole nother step that someone has to go through, and just takes more time, as opposed to
we're still seeing appraisal contingencies lifted, and just have to know that you have to cover if there's a dozen appraise, you have to cover that spread in cash.
And have you seen it start to change on the appraisal side, where the appraisals are coming in below where you wanted them to be?
We saw that a little bit over COVID.
Yeah. Sometimes they couldn't keep up, we'd have buyers who were like, I have to pay this price to get this property, but it's not going to appraise, because it's also, appraisals are so subjective, right? You get an appraiser out there. And so we got to the point where we were looking at pending sales, homes that had not even closed. And we would call every single agent, be like, what day are you closing? And what are you going to close for? And we're going to schedule the appraisal the day after you close, so we can use you as a comp, because that's how quickly the market was moving.
Well, also, you didn't have a lot of comps, period, right?
Yeah.
While there was activity and stuff was selling quickly, it's not like you'd have 10 comparable sales to really compare to.
Yeah.
And I think that's still the case. So now let's look ahead, I guess, a little bit. So going forward, is inventory still very low.
Yes.
And so does, for lack of a better political term, does the supply-demand issue, so there's still people want to buy homes, still people have money, not necessarily rate sensitive, and a low inventory of homes, does that dynamic trump what all else is going on in the marketplace? Does that negate the rates are going up, the stock market is not doing well, supply chain issues, inflation, gas prices, unemployment at all-time low, can't find people to work? What do all those things do against the home market? Because when I talk to people and they say, what do you do? And I say, I own a real estate company. And they go, oh, what do you think is going to happen to the value of my house? I'm like, I don't know. I don't do that. But I talk to people that do. So I'm curious your input.
I guess the analogy I would use is if, the Fed raising interest rates and everything that happened is sort of like throwing the housing market out of a plane. And so the lack of inventory is kind of like a parachute, right? So it's like there are two opposing forces sort of fighting each other. And I think right now, because we're still at 60% pre-COVID inventory levels. So across the west side of LA and all the markets that we work in. So inventory is still low, and that's going to be a big driver. Eventually, I think it just depends how long, we're not economists. I think it just depends how long these things continue and how much more interest rates increase and what other things happen on like the larger scale. But it's definitely it's an opposing force. So we're still seeing appreciation just at a much slower rate. How long will that continue? We're not sure. I think for the next 6 months, we're still expecting appreciation just in the single digits as opposed to the double digits we've had for the last few years.
And Sarah, back to your comment, I mean, so now that rates have risen, people that don't have to buy, that like where they live, they just wanted something bigger or different or closer to the school or whatever the reason is, they are not going to refinance. So, and they have a good rate. So then they just go, hey, you know what? I can't find what I want. I'm just going to stay. So what that does, it sort of sucks for the agents because then I lose a client, or I have a client that just kicks the tires and hangs out over here and I got to try and find him what he wants. And in the meantime, it also does not free up inventory, because if that person found what they wanted, they would then sell their house. So the agent gets two deals or none, and the market is deprived of that additional inventory.
At the same time, though, there's a lot of buyers that wrote 10 offers maybe during COVID, and they got bid out every single time. And those buyers now may have their shot to get their house. So that's kind of the way I think that we're looking at it. We have a lot of clients that wrote great offers, 50% down, all cash offers, over asking, but they still didn't get the house. I'm hoping those buyers this fall and this winter, they'll be able to purchase now.
And they'll be like, now's maybe my time.
Exactly, yeah.
No, that makes sense. And so how is it on the brokerage side? Because as the market changes, as it is just not so easy to hold up your hand and go, hi, I have a listing, it sells in 48 hours. Does that start to take the weekend warrior agent out of the game or less of a factor? And so for people that like yourselves that are professionals that do it every day, that they live and breathe it, to me, it sort of weeds the extras out of there and creates a little less competition, which is more opportunity. And then you become more of an expert because you really do it. And somebody who isn't an expert can't really make it up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally think so. You have a lot of people who are part-time agents, like you said, and I think these are the times where people who have experience, who are full-time agents, who this is our career, are much better positioned because people want someone with experience. I think during COVID, when houses were flying off the shelves, it was very interesting. We saw a lot of out-of-area brokers in our neighborhoods. We saw someone's cousin, sister, best friends selling their house that they probably never would have entrusted before. But in some ways, it was much easier to sell a home during that time, right?
Yeah.
You put it on the market and you're going to get 30 offers.
Yeah.
So I think things are shifting for sure. I mean, it's tough. The market this is not an easy market. This is not a market I would want to be in as a brand new agent, having some experience, having weathered some, we haven't done huge economic cycles, but having some context of different scenarios is really valuable at this time.
Yeah, no, I think there's no question that the weekend warrior job gets that much more difficult. And then also you actually have to do work. And then if you're not doing it every day, you really don't have your finger on the pulse, because now it's changing. It's not just every deal is more expensive than the last deal. You've really got to come back with some data and have those difficult conversations with your buyer or your seller so you can actually make a deal and make some money, because as we all know in the brokerage business, you don't make a deal, there's
Yeah.
no money.
Yeah.
So what do you think the expectation is? I'm gonna, I guess, fire off a few questions because we're short on time. Everybody says it goes quick, and then it goes, and then you're done. Interest rates between now and the end of the year. If I need a loan today, where are we roughly? Are we in the 5s today if I needed to go get a loan?
High 5s to 6s.
And
yeah.
where do you think that is by December? I won't hold you to it, but
I think it might go up a tiny bit. I mean, we saw it in a couple weeks ago, we saw the lowest low since April, but then things came up a little bit again with some of the stuff that's happening in the market. So I don't think it's going to go to 7, but I think we're going to kind of hover around this, kind of ebbing and flowing around 6.
yeah. And the banks that I've talked to have said it's not 100% direct correlation between the Fed
No.
and a home loan. At the same time, if you rewind and you look back pre the recession, rates were 5.5. Nobody complained. Everybody was fine
Yeah.
with it. It wasn't the end of the world.
No, people are just used to 2s.
Right. It
So they're
sucks.
just,
Sucks
like,
compared to
wrapping their heads.
2.5, right?
Yeah.
We have short memories.
Yes,
Yeah, very
for sure.
short memories.
And in terms of the demand between now and then the end of the year, do you see it continuing to decline or stay the same, or people come out of the woods?
I think we're going to see demand pick up. I think we had a big summer lull, especially with way more travel this summer than we've experienced, of course, in the last 2 years. And we noticed, I really noticed on my listings, especially the ones that have been on throughout the summer, way more calls for showings and more activity at open houses because people are back in town. So I think this fall, going into the winter, we'll have more demand than we've seen the last few months.
Yeah. And then in terms of just the buyers that are out there, is it foreign people? Is it entertainment people? Is it your average person? Is it investment groups, flippers, builders? Is it all of the above?
All of the above. We're seeing more and more tech in LA. I think coming down from San Francisco, especially in the higher price points, always entertainment. Obviously, I think the finance community is always big in the neighborhoods we service, but all of the above. Investors, we still have investors who are very active, but they're definitely getting much more aggressive.
Yeah. And what is the biggest thing that you guys are watching and you're telling your clients to watch in terms of indicators in the economy? I know the biggest thing is comps, because if my neighbor's house sells, that's a good one, and I can use that for many reasons. But other than the comps, is it supply chain? Is it inflation? Is it the Fed? Is there one thing that really is going to have a significant impact on what happens to your world?
What would
Well,
you say?
we talk, I was going to say our unsold inventory
That's what I was
index.
gonna say, too.
Yeah. So we really track closely the unsold inventory index. So if you have 40 homes on the market in an area and only 20 homes sold last month, that means it would take 2 months to sell the current inventory if no new homes came on the market. That's a huge seller's market, right? That's a 2. If you start to get to that 5 or so, you're kind of at a balanced market, and then 5, 6, you're starting to go to a buyer's market. So that's really what we track. So we can tell a buyer that wants to buy a $5 million home, hey, we're at a 2-month inventory index, or sometimes we're still at 1 month unsold inventory index. So that's still a very strong seller's market. We also will look oftentimes going in the past year, looking at all the homes that sold in their price range, so they could see, wow, there is 20 homes that sold. I can keep waiting. Maybe a great home will come on next month that would work for me, or only 3 other homes sold in the last year that would have worked for me. I should try to make this one work.
And so I guess what I'm hearing is it's sort of on a case-by-case basis based on what your buyer or your seller is trying to do. But in general, is there an advice for the buyer client out there in today's world? Do you tell them, hey, wait, and keep looking for what you want and see if the market corrects itself some more, or get out there and get active, and if you find what you want, make a deal?
I think, like to Sarah's point, this is probably not the easy answer, but it very much depends on what they're trying to look for and what they're trying to accomplish, and how long are you staying in the home. That's a big thing for us. If you're planning on only being in this home 2 years, we're going to have very different advice for you than if you're like, I'm going to hold this home 7, 10, maybe 15 years. Are you adding value? Or is it a fixer where you're going to be able to do forced appreciation plus whatever the market does? So we kind of advise people differently depending on their situation.
And if I'm thinking about selling my house, do I hurry up and do it before rates go up, or do I sit tight and hope for the best?
We don't know what's going to happen. So right now we still know that it's a strong seller's market. So we would, of course, advise you to do it now.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. That's good stuff. So unfortunately, we are out of time. It does go very quickly.
It does.
I mean, we can talk all day, I'm sure. And we didn't even get to talk about Mark Wahlberg's $87 million house.
Next time.
So we'll have to have you guys back. But I do appreciate all the input and the insight. in terms of the market and the happenings in Los Angeles. I appreciate you coming down to Orange County and sharing your thoughts with us, and wish you and your team and your company much continued success. So to both of you, thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us.
Yeah. So I am Barry Saywitz, president of the Saywitz Company. I want to thank Paul and Sophia and the entire team here at OC Talk Radio for each week putting this stuff together. If it's Tuesday, we'll be back here again. Actually, we're going to take off next week for Labor Day, and we're going to take a break. Everybody go to the beach. It's going to be hot out there. And we'll see you back here in 2 weeks. And for everyone here, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on Let's Talk Real Estate.
Well, there you have it. You've been listening to Let's Talk Real Estate, your weekly BS with Barry Saywitz about the current state of the real commercial real estate market right here in Southern California. On Orange County's only community radio station, OC Talk Radio, streaming live from our studio here at the University of California Irvine's Beale Applied Innovation Center.